Hey guys, Miss Jaeger here, and welcome back to World of Warships. Huzzah! And today we're going to be having a talk, I'm going to be having a talk about the new lines of naval vessels, the Soviet destroyer line and the German cruiser line. We've yet to see any battleships, but oh well. Now today what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a sort of a brief oversight into the new, or brief view into the new lines. I won't go into general big details or boring stats-wise. I'm just going to give you a general, yeah, this is what they are, seems to be working like this, and my opinion on the matter. So, first of all, let's talk about the German cruiser lines. Now, upon looking at the stats of the particular line, upon looking at the stats of the cruiser lines, which I'm going to assume are stock, the general consensus of the particular lines of the German cruisers is that everything up to tier 4 seems to be semi shit to semi meh. As you know, I imagine any kind of naval vessel would be going up to tier 4. With the German vessels, though, they tend to be not so great on survivability. Artillery at tier 2 and 3 is just god awful, and you know, it's not got much hit points of anything. Though, ironically, the first particular vessel up to tier 4, the tier 1 gunboat Hermling class, is actually kind of a relatively decent all-rounder for a tier 1, which is slightly ironic. But I don't know, generally speaking, the new German cruiser line tends to seem to be a bit like the Japanese battleship line in the sense that it starts to get good and continues to get better once you've hit tier 5. The artillery starts to get good, torpedo starts to get good, survivability not so fantastic initially, being a cruiser, you're not supposed to take damage, but then again your artillery starts to get better and better. You also have access to torpedoes, which is pretty nice. I think you get access to torpedoes from about tier 4 onwards, so afterwards the torpedoes just get better and better and better, so not only are you capable of fighting with your guns, which are generally speaking be able to sort of either spam your opponents with shells if you're like an Atlanta class or Cleveland, and you also then have the ability to throw a number of torpedoes at them. One of the particular vessels I definitely want to get my hands on is the Tier 8 Admiral Hipper. That ship looks badass, and not only does it have a badass way, its torpedoes may be lacking in the sense of the stats, and bearing in mind I'm imagining these are stock values, if I haven't said so already. But the general looks of this particular Tier 8 cruiser is, it looks good. I ain't gonna lie. This particular vessel does look pretty damn badass, and it seems to be a lovely little goal if I were to go up along the cruiser line. Definitely seems like something to do on. Afterwards, you've got the Tier 9, which, you know, obviously gets even better and better. Then, of course, you've got the Tier 10 Hindenburg, which is like the culmination of everything. The guns are great, maneuverability is good, concealment is kind of shit, but then again, you are huge. And everything else, you know, survivability is extremely good, leading up from about, yeah, once you hit Tier 8 to Tier 10, that's when your survivability just umps up another, like, 20 hit points. It's like, yes, another 20 hit points, because that's so much. No, when you go from Tier 7 to Tier 8, that's when you start having the hard hitter cruisers. They're the kind of cruisers that will say, yeah, fuck off, and here's a torpedo to say so, sort of thing. It's a really nice, powerful, hard-hitting cruiser line, which, I'll be honest with you, it seems like it's going to fit my style of cruising, because, like, when I'm a cruiser, I tend to be relatively aggressive. Sailing the Atlanta is one of those names. That's one of the reasons why I want to get a Cleveland, because the Cleveland and the Atlanta are both ships I absolutely adore. Because what I love doing, although I hate it as a battleship, I can't help but love it anyway, is I get to constantly unleash hell upon any vessel that I lay my eyes on, with such ridiculously fast rate of fire. Like, if I could upgrade my reload capacity on the... I think I can upgrade my reload capacity on that, and I probably will definitely upgrade the reload capacity of my Atlanta, just so that way I could hammer the living shit out of anything else. And The only downside, of course, is the fact that obviously, I tend to die very quickly in my cruisers because I am still overly aggressive. Either because I put myself in a very disadvantageous position, despite my best attempts not to, or I end up going into a particular area thinking I'm going to have backup, and then the rest of my team is frightened of actually taking damage in a video game, and then proceeds to run away like the cowards they are, leaving me to an unfortunate fate at the hands of virtually every other member of the enemy team. But oh well, that's wargaming for you. Well, no, that's online gaming, but also that's online gaming. But that seems to be a thing when it comes to World of Tanks and World of Warships. Yeah, it's like, oh my god, it's an enemy ship that I'm supposed to help destroy. Run! Anyway, so the general view and consensus of this particular German line is it's hard hitting, it's relatively maneuverable. The one thing I'm noting amongst all of the German battleships, the German cruisers, at least tier 4, tier 5 onwards, even tier 3 and tier 2, you know, the general consensus with these particular lines is that they're very maneuverable. They're fast, they're agile. The concealment factor is pretty decent for lower tiers as well, which obviously, considering the fact that the tier 2 and tier 3 are virtually shit when it comes to their offensive capacity, their defensive capacity is what probably is going to help save you more often than not. So the general consensus with this particular line is I really want to grab one of these because it would appear that from tier 4 onwards, these particular vessels are going to fit my style a lot more than, say, the Japanese or the American cruiser lines, even though I do love fast-firing guns. So, let's jump over to the Russian destroyer line, which is also due to be introduced alongside the German cruisers. Now, I'm not really a destroyer-like person, so generally for me, I'm going to be more indifferent to this particular line of vessels than perhaps other people would be. I'm not really much of a destroyer person. I can see the advantages of them, and I can see when someone is doing a good job in them, but I don't think I could ever perform to the same level in them as those people. So generally speaking, I don't know if I'm likely to jump into the Russian destroyer line. But the general view, upon looking at the initial stats, I'm going to once again assume that they are stock stats, that the particular vessels in question tend to inherit the pros and cons of seemingly more America, but it does have the Japanese-like elements. It's a bit of a hybrid between the two, but it seems to be that as you go up the tier, it switches a bit. Like certain ships switch a bit. So, for example, their torpedo range, some of the torpedoes are better in certain regards. Other vessels seem to have their guns pretty damn good as well. At tier 5, I think everything leading up to tier 5, it's a mix of whether the guns are better or the torpedoes are better, and it's sort of, yeah, it's a bit of a tit for tat sort of thing. And as a destroyer person, you'll probably find it's leaning more towards one side than the other. But from my initial standpoint, it seems to be that the sort of low to mid tier, it's a bit of a tit for tat. But then, as you start going up through the line, you're starting to see more things like decent quality gun ranges, as the Russians sort of start inheriting just 130mm guns more and more, and their range is pretty decent. And then, of course, you start encountering more and more torpedoes, which naturally, of course, tend to get to the point where I reckon once you start hitting the very high tiers, from like tier 9 to tier 10 onwards, from tier 9 to tier 8 to tier 10, then that's when you start sort of thinking, right, I can now completely bugger over a enemy. I can probably completely bugger over a Yamato if I so choose, and if I was able to do so, and if the Yamato was as dumb as he could be to get completely whipped out, destroyed by a set of torpedoes. I am sorry, battleship drivers, but the reputation we've got now is pretty hard to shake. But yeah, like, it just seems, I mean, the thing that I just see from this particular line, and I could be wrong, but I just keep seeing hybrid whenever I see this particular line of vessels. It just says to me I'm fairly capable of working both sides. I'm not, you could say, I'm not dedicated as a great gunboat or a great torpedo vessel, but I can do a good job, in both departments, which, while is nice, I guess, for a destroyer person, a destroyer captain, I guess it's all a matter of personal preference, whether or not you prefer to have the fast-firing guns whilst you're moving into position to knock out carriers or vessels that are easily set on fire, or whether or not you prefer to sort of stay further back and nuke the fucker with a torpedo spread. So, like I said, I'm not likely to go up this line. I'm not too particularly fussed about it. In my eye, they're just a new bunch of enemy ships that I need to sink before they get too close. If they are on my enemy team, and those who I need to support get close to their ships if they are on my team. So, yeah, not really too fussed about it. But, for those destroy captains out there, this is definitely a different and interesting line, and certainly it's going to provide a decent level of challenge to anyone who knows how to use them properly, and who can use these effectively against enemy vessels. And I imagine I'm going to be seeing a fair amount of ponage videos from a variety of other YouTubers when they get hands on people who know how to handle them. Okay, so I've talked briefly about both the German and the Russian naval lines, and given my general consensus and opinion on the matter, though personally I might just start a tiny little rant, because in all honesty I'm slightly disappointed, I say slightly, I'm kind of annoyed at the fact that in, a naval game set in the Second World War, considering the fact of what was going on in the Second World War, naval battles, when the game was initially introduced, it made sense that the Japanese and the American lines would be introduced as the first big naval things, because those two were the largest naval powers of the Second World War to a degree, in the sense of the amount of battles that they had. Like, obviously, the Pacific Campaign, there was the most naval battles there, without a doubt. Midway, the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, all those famous battles were mostly American. They were American versus Japan. So that's, without question, that made sense upon release. What I don't understand, and, my personal opinion, so if you disagree, by all means, leave in the comment section down below, or just accept the fact it's my opinion, my channel. What I don't agree is the fact that then, almost instantly, we get the next bloody thing, which is, is that apparently the British Navy, which at the time was the most powerful navy in the world, is not introduced to World of Warships Next. Now, I imagine they are going to be introduced. I mean, Christ almighty, it would be a really dumb decision to not introduce the British forces into the game that, is all about the Navy, because the one thing we did do well during the Second World War was have a good Navy. So, it sort of pisses me off that you've got a very good game about naval warfare, and you're not including the nation who had pretty much, I'm going to say, the best in naval warfare at that time. I mean, America certainly has a fairly decent amount of ships. Japan has also a fairly decent amount of ships, and they've had some very powerful naval vessels. But the British also had some pretty damn good ships as well. I mean, most people talk about the Warspite and how it was such a good naval vessel. So why the hell is it not being introduced into the game sooner? I would have put that priority well over Russian Navy, because, no offense, Russia, your war was mostly over land, and the only naval parts I ever learnt and studied about was the Russian ships getting bombed as they left Sevastopol as they were trying to flee, or if you will, the little tugboats that you were trying to cross the Volga with as you were trying to retake Stalingrad. There isn't really much of any kind of naval forces to really be contend with, and even more so, there were Russian soldiers, Navy sailors, from their navy who were pressed into army service because there was virtually no use for the Russian Navy in the Eastern Front. Of all the fronts of the world at that time of the war, the Eastern Front was the most land-based one, which, it kind of is a bit annoying that the developers of this game would focus more on playing towards the Russian Navy than anything. And I realize this is a Russian game, and I realize that they have a market to sell to in Russia because, it's a Russian-like game. It's probably the most popular when it comes to Russian-like games and all that, and, whatever. But it's just like, it really does get a bit, frustrating when they sort of say a navy that didn't do anything during the Second World War, virtually, is also the one that is going to be prioritized over a navy which actually did a fairly large portion of the fighting. In fact, in the early Second World War, the British and the German navies had major battles and dueling. I mean, if any of you guys have ever seen the film Sink the Bismarck, or watched anything about the Bismarck battle, the level of epicness between the British and the German Navy, like, you've got this massive German battleship, the Bismarck, and, like, the feeling you get when you see the hood get ripped open by the shell that blew up the magazine of the thing. And my great-grandfather served on the HMS Hood. He was very lucky to have been sent off to another vessel, but then he served on the Ark Royal. He was part of the skeleton crew on that, magnificent vessel that sadly couldn't be saved. And it's like, you're prioritizing a bunch of Russians who mostly got pressed into the land war over a navy that did one of the most epic duels in the Atlantic. It's like, the fuck? But, it's once again, it's my own personal opinion, and some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, but I personally feel that wargaming should have gone with the British Navy first, because the British Navy was powerful. We had large guns. We were the most powerful navy at that time. And we were the Navy was the reason why Germany daren't go across the ocean without taking care of the RAF first. Operation Sea Lion kind of either had to have the Royal Air Force knocked out or the Royal Navy knocked out. And generally speaking, they opted for the Royal Air Force. But generally speaking, it was quite a large and powerful navy, and to ignore that and just prioritize Russia over it kind of is a bit annoying to me, because it's like, no, Russia did fuck all when it came to the navy. Like, seriously, in all the famous historical accounts, like the ones that if anyone starts to learn the Second World War, the big things that Russia did was Kursk, it was Stalingrad, it was Leningrad, it was the Battle of Silo Heights, the taking of Berlin. None of those featured any kind of naval support. Like, if you will, the famous battles during the Second World War, the Battle of Sevastopol, the thing you could mention about the Russian Navy was the fact that Schwere Gustav, when she ammo-racked a harbour, it's hilarious, when she ammo-racked one of the harbour areas, one of the ships that was nearby sank, sort of thing. That was pretty much the extent of the Russian naval contribution to the Second World War. Now, I'm not saying that the Russian Navy shouldn't be included in the game. By all means, include them into the game, but just don't throw them in as part of the big Germany and something else. Like, it should have, in my opinion, it should be Germany and Britain, because that's what we fought. The first few battles of the war were Germany versus Russia. Germany versus Britain. No, we're not looking at the Patriotic War. The first battles of the Second World War completely was Germany versus Britain in a naval battle with the Graf Spee. Battle of I can't remember it. I can't remember the name, but it was off the coast of Brazil-like area, and basically the captain of the Graf Spee, realizing that he was conned into thinking that the Royal Navy had sent more vessels than they actually have, scuttled the vessel. And it was, and he had a pocket battleship, which was ridiculous. It was advanced at the time. It's another really cool kind of thing. But yeah, I'll suffice it to say, I'm not best pleased with the way that this thing goes, and this is kind of more of a rant than anything else. But in my opinion, I think they made a mistake when it came to introducing the Russian line over the British line, because we did something. But yeah, quickly going into the theory about what could be done during how it could be introduced. I imagine what will possibly happen is either the Russian tech tree will probably be flushed out more along with the German tech tree, Or if we're lucky, I mean, I imagine this is possibly an unlikely concept, but it's still possible. We could be lucky, and the next big introduction would be the British forces, finally, after the Russian Navy gets their turn, even though they cut the line. And it could be that after a few patches, maybe, of like either fixes or introducing of another particular line of German or Russian ships, we could finally see the British Navy making an appearance on the field, the oceans of battle, whereupon then we can actually finally enjoy what really went on during the Second World War. But until then, unfortunately, I'm guessing we're going to have to contend with just playing around with Russian battleships, Russian naval ships, and Russian... I don't even know if the Russians did have any battleships. As I said, ignorant to the naval aspect a little bit for the Russians, but, you know, I don't really think I had to study them since they didn't actually do anything. Anyway, so apart from that, thank you very much for watching this, guys. Apologies for the slight rant, but it did kind of piss me off when they didn't include the Royal Navy in this particular thing, considering how many men lost their lives in the Royal Navy over how many Russians lost their lives on their navies. So, you know, tit for tat, whatever. But anyway, so yeah, thank you very much for watching this, guys. If you like this kind of content, do let me know in the comment section down below, clicking on the like button, and of course subscribing to the channel. And also, if you agree/disagree with what I think, you know, if you think that the Russian Navy is fair enough, you know, I can understand why they did it. I'm not going to complain too much. It's just personal opinion-wise. I personally think it would be better if the British Navy would have been introduced, as they did contribute a fair amount more to the naval battles during the Second World War than the Russians did. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. This is Mr. Jaeger signing out. I'll catch you next time.